Hi. Well, where to begin? I'm sure probably most of you have been hearing lately of all the political pandering in Congress right now, especially surrounding Republicans' attempts to defund the IRS and now potentially vote on a bill known as the FairTax. Well, that's been interesting. So, first, who am I? My name is Scott, and I've been a FairTax supporter for more years than I can even count right now. I'm also currently a volunteer for Americans for Fair Taxation, which is the organization that originally developed the Fair Tax. So, people probably thinking, oh, the Fair Tax, it's just a Republican plan that popped up out of nowhere. It's nothing but a political ploy for them to get votes or I don't know who, whatever in the House. That's not the case. The fair tax is something that's been around for over 20 years. It's been heavily researched. It was developed with economists. It wasn't developed in Congress. It was developed in the private sector. So a lot of what's been saying right now is some half-truths, some potentially innocent misstatements, and then also just a lot of flat-out lies. So I'm making this video in response to all this right now. The fair tax, I'll go over what it is, kind of the broad overview. I will cover some of the opposition issues on it in terms of the lies, the mistruths, and all that fun stuff. And I'll also start with just a very all the details. So the broad overview, what is the fair tax? There are some short videos that you can see and post where people kind of outline it, but I'll go ahead and outline it here so you don't have to go searching for that. In general, the fair tax is a tax replacement bill. It is not a tax elimination. It is not a tax increase bill. There's a congressional rule in Congress that any tax reform bill must be revenue neutral. That's what the fair tax is, a tax reform bill for the federal government. So instead of the current federal income tax, that's just going to be wiped out completely. So no personal income tax, no gift income tax, no estate taxes, no Social Security and Medicare taxes. And what I also like to say is it eliminates the mythical corporate tax, and I'll get into that later. So in its place will be a single rate sales tax on new goods and services over poverty level spending, and there is no sales tax on business to business transactions. So that means for federal taxation purposes, your total tax burden will be 100% visible to you. There will be nothing hidden in corporate taxes or anything like that. So let's go over some of the details. Right now, all those taxes that are getting wiped out, those are all accounted for in the rate calculation for the fair tax. So, like I said, according to congressional rules, the fair tax has to be developed so that it replaces dollar for dollar the amount of revenue the federal government currently takes in. Whether you think that is good, bad, indifferent, doesn't matter. It is a congressional rule. There's no way to get around that. Even if you wanted accompany it with a tax cut, it can't happen. So, sorry, our hands are tied on that. So, in its place, you will see a single 23% inclusive tax rate on all new goods and services. That is without exception across the board. Now, because a straight sales tax is going to be very highly regressive, the fair tax has a family consumption allowance, and this is actually accomplishes several prime goals. For one, this consumption allowance, also known as the prebate, is what's going to change the fair tax from a highly regressive straight sales tax to simply a naturally progressive sales tax based on elective discretionary spending choices. Again, I'll get into this a little bit more, so bear with me. And the reason we came up with it this way is because the founders of the FairTax believe no one should have to feed Uncle Sam until they have first had a chance to feed their own families. That means all legal residents in the U.S. would be able to spend up to the poverty line completely tax-free. Used goods would also not be taxed because we don't believe in double taxation. So, how does this translate into something that's naturally progressive? Well, let's just take the extremes for ease of example. The working poor are, they're living paycheck to paycheck. They're right at the poverty line. They're spending every dime they make. Well, with the straight sales tax, that would be equated to an effective income tax. So if it was 23% on everything, then that would equate to an effective 23% income tax just paid at the time of sale. With the fair tax, all of their spending would be tax-free because if they don't have anything extra to put into savings or for discretionary spending, they're living at the poverty line. Regardless of what their income is, if their spending is at the poverty line, they have zero income tax. If you decide to go out and let's say you're one of the uber wealthy and you're spending close to $2 million, well, you're still going to get the same poverty level exemption, but that's going to be a drop in the bucket for you. So that person, if they go out and spend $2 million on new goods and services, they're actually going to be paying an effective rate close to that 23% maximum. Not quite, but that demonstrates the progressiveness of this. Because it's not the statutory 23% rate that matters, it's the effective rate that matters, which is factored after you look at your spending, the poverty exemption level, and that sort of thing. So how does the poverty exemption level get calculated? It's simple. Every year, families would file with the Social Security office listing who lives with their family, Social Security numbers to verify, and that's it. The Social Security office will then cross-reference that with the poverty level threshold set by the Department of Health and Human Services, and essentially figure out what that spending is, multiply that by 23%, the inclusive tax rate. That tells you how much tax the family is expected to spend on poverty level spending for that year. That amount is divided up into 12 monthly payments. That is sent back to every legal family, and it's paid at the beginning of the month before you even spent a dime. That protects low-income families from having to pay an oppressive sales tax and wait on the government to send them a check later while they may still be struggling. So there's no income tracking on this. There's no expense tracking on this. We don't care, how you spend this rebated check. It's essentially your money and is equivalent to the current standard deduction, only instead of waiting until the end of the year and getting one lump sum, you get it back before you spent anything and as monthly payments. So that's kind of the nitty-gritty of the fair tax. And also, we don't tax business-to-business transactions. That means wholesale prices will come down out of necessity due to market competition, and the workers will receive their entire paycheck with no federal tax withholding. So that means wholesale prices will come down. The fair tax will be added back on top of that. So your after-tax price may go up a little bit, but your wages and thus your discretionary income also go up more than enough to compensate. So just to use rough numbers, let's say an example I like to use is currently, let's say you have $1 of income to spend on a $1 candy bar. You take your dollar out, you get your candy bar, you've got no change left over. With the fair tax, the cost of the candy bar might go up to, let's say, $1.11, maybe $1.15. But your income would change from that $1 to maybe $1.25. It's going to vary depending on your specific situation. But, for example, you're up to $1.25 with which to spend. So now you buy this candy bar, let's say it's $1.15, you've got your $1.25, so you pay for it, you get a dime back in change. So yes, the candy bar did go up in price, but you had more than enough to offset it, and you actually got change back in the transaction. So you're still 10 cents better than that same example under the under the income tax. So, that, like I said, that's the nitty gritty. And now you're probably thinking, okay, what's the drawbacks? Thankfully, there's plenty of people out there that have been trying to figure this out. What are the drawbacks? And in most cases, they can't find any. They have to manufacture these drawbacks. So that's kind of what I want the meat and potatoes of this video to be, and what I want to address. It's probably going to be kind of long. I'm probably not even going to hit everything, but I've got a list here that I'm going to go over. If I don't cover something that people want to know about, or if maybe I'm a little vague or I didn't quite explain something right, feel free to leave comments. I know a lot of these, you look at these big YouTubers, they'll say, oh, leave your comments and blah, blah, blah. But they have big channels. They're unable to just by necessity, really, so I can't blame them, but they're unable to go through the comment section and reply to everyone, individually. And it kind of looks like you're just commenting to the void. I get that. I'm not a big YouTuber. I've just got a small channel I mainly just use to share my personal videos with friends and family, and that's about it. But that being said, this is a very important issue to me. So if I do see comments under there, I don't care if it's, critical or positive of the FairTax. I will try to address any that needs to be addressed. And if you want to just say, hey, FairTax is great, or FairTax is bad, I'm probably not going to address it, because there's really nothing to address. But if you say, hey, I got a question about this aspect of the plan, or this thing that you said, I'm going to try to address that. And if not in a separate video, I'll try to make a straight comment for it. Even if you've got criticisms of the plan, try me. I have been, researching and debating this plan for years. I've heard pretty much everything. So if you've got criticisms of the plan, by all means, leave those criticisms. I will respond. Now, I'll put a caveat to that. I do not I do not pay any attention, rather, to people who just want to throw out mindless insults. If you're going to insult me, I'm just going to ignore you. You may even get blocked from my channel. I don't put up with that. That's not how I work. I do expect civility and respect, with the people I interact with. Now, if you have an honest criticism about the FairTax and you come at it from a sincere perspective, I will return the favor. I will be sincere back with you. I don't edit my videos, so you're going to get to hear all the mistakes and the ums and the ahs. But yeah, if you're sincere with me, I will be sincere back to you. I will not hesitate to provide sources if need be. But if you come at me, snarky and, belligerent, assuming I even respond to that, I'm probably going to be just as snarky and belligerent right back to you. So how I address, any comments and criticisms is going to largely affect how you address them to me. So with that said, let's get started in some of these criticisms. And I'm going to actually start with some that the Biden White House administration has, said first, and then I'll move into some of the others that I've seen popping up in various social media posts. So from the White House, one of their, they had three main complaints that I saw in their statement. The corporations paying their fair share, it could, the middle class impact, and they brought up the President Bush advisory panel. So I'll go through them in that order. A lot of politicians, especially the Democrats, they say corporations should pay their fair share. If you ask me, the only fair share for a corporation is 0%. I don't care what sort of economic plan you have. I don't care what your political beliefs are. It's a basic economic principle that all taxes, without exception, are ultimately paid by individuals. Even if you tax a corporation at 100%, it's going to eventually be passed along to an individual to pay that tax burden. How does that happen? It's either baked into the cost of goods and services, which to this day, the FairTax Commissioner report that found it was an average of 22% of existing purchases have embedded income taxes in them. It was kind of an old report. We've kind of backed off on that, and you generally say, over 18% of your purchases today include corporate and employee income taxes throughout the entire supply chain. So the other way a corporate income tax could be paid is through wage stagnation. So lower wages, people not getting raises, or even lower employment numbers, which kind of flies under the radar because that, if people see wage stagnation, that's okay. Yeah, wages didn't go up that much. On the other hand, if there's the lost opportunity of employment, people really don't see that. You see in the reports, but that's still kind of the same thing. The third way that corporate taxes are paid are lower returns on investment. Well, people might say, oh, well, yeah, that's just your CEOs and everything. Well, not exactly. Retirement funds, yeah, those get hit when corporate taxes go up. So there is no way you can pay a corporate tax without that tax coming out of the pocket of one or more individuals. So the fair tax, understanding this principle, that's why we don't tax business expenses, because that expense would only get baked into the price and then passed along to either the consumer or taken out of wages or whatever. It may even go through several stages. Maybe it doesn't get directly baked into the price of a good and service, but that company may decide to cancel benefits. Well, that means things like, let's say they hold a yearly banquet for their employees. If that banquet get canceled, well, now that tax is effectively being paid by the banquet hall and the caterers and the people that provided the banquet, which means their income goes down, and it could potentially be their employees paying for this corporate tax due to lost hours worked because they've lost an event. So when Biden says, or anyone really says that, we think these corporations need to pay their fair share, well, that's misleading at best and an outright lie when you're talking about somebody like the President of the United States or members of Congress using this as a reason to be against the fair tax, because those people especially should know full well who's actually paying the corporate tax. That's you and me. The other one, they say the fair tax would impact the middle class. Well, if this was a straight sales tax, that may be the case. But by having the prebate, exempting poverty level spending, and by not taxing used items, that puts you, the individual, in control of your tax rate. If you want to live frugal and have a very low tax rate, and that is perfectly fine with us. If you want to live at or beyond your means and drive your effective tax rate way up there, again, that is your decision. But that is not necessarily an aspect of the fair tax. Because with the fair tax, remember, everybody starts at 0%. The only way your tax rate can go up is based on your choices. So if this is impacting anyone negatively, those people need to re-examine their spending habits. Perhaps they need to relearn how to budget, because the people that are struggling, they're struggling out of necessity. And I don't want to sound heartless, because yes, I do have sympathy for these people. Everybody has had a low spot in their life when it comes to wages, but they are frugal out of necessity, and they're going to have a very low effective tax rate. With the fair tax being able to not tax savings and investing, this does actually allow them to keep more of their income, to which they can, if they choose, put that money into savings and earn some interest, or use this extra income to pay down bills. So this doesn't negatively impact or put the burden on the middle class. It actually helps lift them and the lower classes up. And everybody's gonna be like, oh, well, what about the rich? You know what? Who cares? do you think, somebody living at poverty who is going to get a substantial, benefit to better their life with the fair tax is going to give a damn about, the uber rich that may or may not see any sort of reward for this? No, they're going to care about their own financial situation. The vast majority of people are going to care about their own financial situation. The only people that are trying to play this class warfare BS is going to be, your politicians and people that are invested in this class warfare. So there's also another aspect of where this whole middle class impact comes from. There was one of the news articles against the fair tax. They pointed out that they were under the assumption that the sales tax would necessarily be a large tax cut for the rich, but they also recognized the prebate being a tax cut for the poor or lifting them up. So they said, oh, well, that must mean the middle class bears the burden of this. Well, what that article and other people using that argument miss is the fair tax drastically increases the tax base. That means more people paying the sales tax than are currently paying the income tax, which includes foreign visitors and even illegal aliens. Those same people, though, are also not going to be getting the prebate. They would be paying the full 23% on every new good and service, even their basic groceries. It also doesn't include the fact that sales taxes are generally much easier to enforce, which means the tax evasion is essentially going to go away. I mean, yeah, there's going to be some tax evasion. There's not going to be a tax plan without it. That's, kind of an American pastime, is to avoid taxes. But the illegal tax evasion under a sales tax is almost nothing compared to tax evasion under an income tax. The Biden administration and others have also pointed to the President Bush advisory panel on taxation, saying that, oh, even this advisory panel from the Republicans is not in support of the fair tax. Well, again, this is a misstatement at best, if not an outright lie. The President Bush Advisory Tax Panel did not score the fair tax. Let me repeat that. They did not score the fair tax. Yes, the panel looked at a consumption tax, but it was a generalized consumption tax with some aspects that kind of mimic what the fair tax had, but they also left out a lot of things. They made changes to it and then scored their own version. Now, I would actually agree. Their version probably is not recommended. But again, that wasn't the fair tax. If you go read the report, the fair tax by name is only mentioned once, maybe twice. Whenever they were looking at consumption taxes, they were looking at their own plan. And you'll find that's kind of a general theme when it comes to a lot of these opposition articles. They will make changes to the plan and then argue against their own version. They will not argue against the fair tax as written and as evaluated by actual economists who developed the plan. So let's go on. A lot of people try to say, oh, this is regressive. I kind of touched on this, but again, this is a naturally progressive plan because it is not a straight sales tax. If, let's say, using some hypothetical numbers, because I don't have the chart with me, but let's say your poverty level spending is $20,000 a year, which means you could spend $20,000 and not owe any tax. Your tax rate is 0. If you spend $40,000, that first $20,000 is still tax-free. You're only taxed on $20,000, so you would only be taxed on half of your income at the 23% inclusive rate. If you spend $100,000, again, the first $20,000 non-tax, you're only taxed on $80,000. So once you plug in the fair tax sales tax rate, you'll see exactly how that tax burden, the curve progressively goes up. Again, I'm a lot of this I'm speaking off the cuff, so forgive me for not having a bunch of charts and graphs to show you hard numbers. Um, Another common argument. Oh, well, this will be a massive tax increase on the poor because currently half of Americans don't pay income taxes. Again, very misleading statement. Now, does half of the country have a zero effective income tax? Yeah, that number is close to correct, but that is not the only number. Those same people that have zero income tax, well, for one, that number only accounts for personal income tax. It does not account for the non-deductible FICA payroll taxes, so Social Security and Medicare taxes. Now, that a lot of people think, oh, that's only a little over 7% on my paycheck. Not quite. You've got your employer portion. Now, a lot of people, kind of like with corporate taxes, are like, oh, the corporation pays that, and I don't, because they've been told, ever since they got their first job, oh, you only pay half of FICA, the company pays the other half. Well, no. In actuality, you're paying the entire 15.3% FICA tax. It's just your wages your base wage is cut by that, 7.15% or whatever employer share of the FICA taxes. Or they're building that into the price of their goods and services. So either way, you're still paying both sides of that portion. So you're looking at a 15.3% non-deductible income tax on this person that has quote unquote zero income taxes. It's also not looking at the current embedded corporate taxes that I talked in employee taxes that I talked about earlier. So if we assume that it's at least 18% embedded taxes on purchases, that means somebody living paycheck to paycheck that has no income tax are actually paying over 30% effective income tax if they live paycheck to paycheck, because they are paying the 15.3% FICA, and then the rest of their income is getting paid to that 18+% embedded tax. So which would you rather have? A minimum of 30% income tax, even though you have no personal income tax, you still got these others. So would you rather have that minimum 30% tax or more? Or would you rather start with zero federal tax and then only pay based on your spending choices when you're both willing and able to pay that tax? So what's the rate? I've been talking about the rate in an inclusive manner. That's 23% of the purchase price. So if an item costs $100 on the shelf, the item wholesale would be $77. You'll pay $23 in tax for a $100 $100 final sale on the product. Now, you'll hear a lot of people say, oh, no, it's actually a 30% tax. Well, actually, yeah, kind of is. So how? Well, typically, sales taxes are expressed as an exclusive basis. So if you have a $100 item on the shelf, you go up to the register, they would add an additional amount. So if it's, let's say, an 8% sales tax, well, then you'd pay $108 at the register. For the fair tax, they say, oh, the item's not really $100 with this 23% income tax. They say it's actually a $77 item with a 30% income tax, or excuse me, a 30% sales tax added to it. Either way, it's still $100 at the register. So if you see somebody arguing, oh, it's not 23, it's 30%, you know what? It's actually both, as long as you are clear on which method you are calculating. If you're looking at the inclusive rate, it's 23%. If you look at the exclusive rate, it's 30%. So why do we go with the inclusive rate? It's because the current federal income tax is based on an inclusive number. That makes it essentially an apples to apples comparison to the fair tax rate. So how does this work? Let's say you earn $100 and there is this same 23% tax rate. If it's 23% income tax, you now have, you pay $23 to Uncle Sam, you have $77 to go out and do what you wish. So you go and you go buy this widget or whatever for $77. If under the fair tax, you have no tax withholding, excuse me, so you get the full $100 in your paycheck. You then take that full $100 to the store, you buy the exact same widget, you go to the register, you pay the $100. In both cases, you have earned $100, you bought a widget for $77, and you paid $23 in tax. Both versions or both methods of taxation in that example are inclusive numbers. That means it's easy to see, okay, if now let's say I earn $100,000 a year, and right now my income tax is, let's say, $25,000 because you're in a 25% tax bracket. Well, now you then have to go figure the embedded taxes in your purchases, which again, those embedded taxes I've talked about before, those are also inclusive numbers. So you can go through and kind of find your effective tax rate somewhat easily. I mean, it's not going to be exact, but you can kind of get it from there. Then you can say under the fair tax, okay, I make $100,000 a year, but I'm getting everything. I spend, let's say, I don't know, $95,000 a year, but I'm only spending maybe $60,000 of that on new stuff, and then the rest of that is, used or whatever. And then from there, you can factor in your prebate, and you can still come up with an effective tax rate related to your income tax, and you're still using the same measurement, inclusive tax rates, regardless of the calculation. If we were to use or make the fair tax an exclusive tax rate, now you first have to do a conversion from the exclusive to the inclusive rate before you can compare that to the income tax. So, I mean, it's a conversion that can be done, but it's not a conversion rate that everybody's going to know off the top of their head, and it's an extra step. So for ease of comparison, we've got the inclusive rate as the official rate, but we do understand that is equivalent to a 30% exclusive sales tax rate. The problem with many of the critics is they don't make that distinction. They'll just tell you it's a 30% sales tax and leave it at that. And they'll say, oh, you're actually paying more than whatever the fair tax proponents are saying. When in actuality, you're paying the same either way, as long as you are honest about how you calculate it. All right, Social Security and Medicare. So I mentioned earlier that when we eliminate the income tax, Social Security and Medicare, aka the FICA taxes, would also go away from your federal withholding on your paycheck. There's also a lot of people that have been hearing rumblings from the Republicans saying that, oh, they're wanting to kill off Social Security and Medicare. Now, if the Republicans are wanting to kill those plans off, that is an entirely different debate for a different day that I'm not going to go into here because that is not part of the fair tax. I am going to keep this explanation just to the fair tax as it is written and as it has been written for the past 20 years. So the fair tax rate calculation has a specific earmark in it that requires factoring in the cost of Social Security and Medicare into the sales tax rate that would be, required to bring in adequate funding. So, yes, the FICA taxes go away. The plans themselves remain intact and remain funded, and in fact would actually be shored up in their funding simply due to effectively removing things like the payroll caps on some of the FICA stuff, and simply that there's going to be a larger tax base paying into these programs now. So what happened, kind of lost my train of thought. Oh, yes, there is also another earmark in the fair tax that specifically allocates that portion of the sales tax to the Social Security and Medicare plans. And that is black and white right in the the FairTax bill HR 25. So if you want to look that up, you can definitely go look it up. Though it does use like the legalese terms for them, they don't call them Social Security or Medicare. It's like the um, uh, disability insurance and hospital insurance, I think is what or something to that effect. So you can do like a word search and find it in the bill. Another complaint: the rich are just going to overseas buy their products and avoid the tax. You know what? Maybe it would happen here and there, but what those people don't realize is instead of just going down to the store, buying whatever, paying the tax, come home, you now have to factor in importing. So if you buy through an importer, the sales tax is still going to be applied to the product. So even if it is imported from overseas, it's still going to be owed. If you decide you want to, fly out of the country to go buy something in another country, well, now you have the cost of the airline ticket, which that's not going to be cheap. That'll probably be more than the tax itself. And when you bring those items back, you're going to have your import duties, and the fair tax would still be owed on that same item when you pay those import duties. So you actually pay import and the fair tax. So, there might be some smuggling. Like I said, evasion is going to happen, but this idea that people are just going to be traveling outside the country, buying anything and everything and bringing it back to avoid the sales tax, it's not going to happen. It actually is going to cost that person more money to do so. Black markets. A lot of people say, you've got this stupid high sales tax rate, you're going to cause black markets to pop up everywhere. And the example they often like to try and use is look at cigarette smuggling into New York. Well, there's a big, big difference, or rather a tiny difference, depending on how you want to look at it, in black markets for basically anything and everything, and a black market for smuggled cigarettes. Cigarettes, they're tiny, they're easily hidden, and you can freely travel across state lines. There's nothing stopping anybody from going from New York into, Connecticut or Pennsylvania or, any of the other neighboring states and pick up, some cartons of cigarettes and drive back into New York and sell them. There's no inspection stations. There's no random traffic stops specifically looking for cigarettes. Like I said, they're easily hidden. So even if you get pulled over for a speeding ticket, unless there's some extenuating circumstance that the officer wants to search your trunk or whatever, they're not going to find those cigarettes. On the other hand, if you've got an across the nation straight, sales tax on essentially everything, now where are you going to smuggle from? You can't go from New York to Pennsylvania or wherever to buy, let's say a refrigerator to avoid the national sales tax, because you're going to be charged for that same tax in Pennsylvania as you would in New York. Not to mention, where are you going to get the stuff? When, for tax evasion to happen, it means the company you're buying from is taking all of the risk to save you a few bucks. Do you know of any company, especially when you consider the vast majority of sales going through big companies like Walmart, is your Walmart cashier going to modify the price to save you, a stranger, a few dollars on an item? I could go on a little bit more about this, but there's an excellent video, or a couple of them actually, on YouTube that if you do a search for the fair tax evasion myth, there's a couple videos. One is older, one is a little bit newer and updated within the past year or so. There's another fair tax supporter that created those. He goes into great detail on why black markets and evading the fair tax is simply not going to happen. I mean, again, whatever evasion that does happen that's going to be unavoidable is going to be nowhere near the near $1 trillion income tax evasion that we currently have. And they say, well, I kind of touched on this again. A lot of people say, this is just a political sham by Republicans to try and maintain control of the House. No. Maybe that's what some of them are using it for right now. To be honest, I would rather have seen this plan come up for an honest vote and not being used for political pandering. But unfortunately, it's the situation we are currently in. Now, if you want to look at it in the terms of political pandering, that's the extent of it. The FairTax plan itself, like I said, has been around for 20 years. It was developed in the private sector by economists who used, public feedback based on a number of principles, including, like what I said with the prebate, feeding your family before you feed Uncle Sam, having the least negative impact on the economy, keeping things simple, efficient, keeping the tax fully transparent. Those are the sort of principles that the fair tax was founded on. Um, Now, when it was first introduced into Congress, it actually had bipartisan support. There were Democrats that supported it. Over the years, for whatever reason, the Democrats turned away from the fair tax, and it became kind of a small-time Republican issue. And, to be honest, I'm kind of surprised it came up. It could be coming up for a vote right now because the fair tax removes a ton of power from Congress. It would be the largest single transfer of power from Congress back to the U.S. public. So for our politicians to vote in favor of this, they would be voting against their own self-interest. Now, one of the things that politicians love is power. Passing the fair tax gives up that power. What do the politicians like more than power? Getting elected or reelected. So what does that mean to us? That means that we, the people, need to pound on our representatives, both in the House and in the Senate, and even all the way up to the presidency, whoever's in office, regardless of their political affiliation. We need to be telling them, hey, we want you to pass the fair tax. We demand it. In fact, one of the common phrases, once you understand it, you will demand it. And we need to make this an elections issue. When the politicians start realizing that, hey, I'm not going to get reelected unless I'm supporting this plan, they will start to pass it. But until the public at large, makes this a major elections issue, at best, they're probably just going to be paying lip service. They may just be paying lip service to it right now. I mean, I'm not going to claim to be any sort of a mind reader to them. But it has got the plan back out into the open. And even if it doesn't pass the House this time, it still is a big push in getting this plan, into the public eye so we can have these discussions and for the public to become educated and to continually push on Congress and hopefully get this thing passed. Lastly, one of the common complaints is, oh, well, if we pass this, we'll just wind up with both a sales tax and an income tax. And these critics often point to places like Europe that has VAT taxes where their VAT is similar to it actually is a consumption tax, but it's not a sales tax. But they all have both the VAT and an income tax. Canada has their, I believe, a general sales tax and an income tax. A lot of the states, have both an income tax and a sales tax. So what makes this different? Well, if you go look back at the bill at HR 25, the first order of business is the full elimination of the federal income tax and a phase out of the IRS. Now, unfortunately, we can't kill the IRS in immediately in one fell swoop. There are going to be business that they have to wrap up. So you're talking doing amended returns and waiting for statutes of limitations to run out and that sort of thing. So they will be drawn out over a period of 3 years, but the collection and enforcement of the income tax itself will end full stop as soon as the bill gets enacted into law and the enactment date hits where we switch over to the sales tax. There's also a sunset clause in the fair tax that says if the 16th Amendment, which authorizes an income tax, if the 16th Amendment is not repealed within 7 years, the fair tax will essentially self-destruct, specifically to prevent us from having both a sales tax and an income tax. So if that happens, then fair tax goes away, income tax comes back. But that's, like I said, there's a 7-year period because we do have to allow for the full amendment process to happen. Repealing the 16th cannot happen as part of a general tax bill. It has to go through its own amendment process. Now, something else to compare the fair tax with the other countries with something like a VAT. For those that don't know, a VAT is a value-added tax. That means a product is taxed at every stage of the production line based on the value that's been added to it. And that starts from the raw materials all the way up until the point of retail sale. The problem with that is similar to our federal income tax, is that price is added to the product without the public seeing it. In fact, many, if not most of those countries have laws specifically preventing the amount of VAT embedded in a product from being printed on the receipt. They intentionally try to keep that tax hidden from the public because VAT is great at raising government revenues. They can jack up the tax rate on a VAT, and people typically just see it as a sign of inflation. The fair tax has a requirement that the tax rate, well, let me back up a little bit. The fair tax is only taxed once and only once on the initial retail level purchase of a product or service. And there is a requirement that the tax rate and amount paid must be printed on every receipt. That is why the fair tax is able to be 100% transparent, because you aren't paying a hidden tax that was embedded 3 steps up the supply chain, when, iron ore came out of the ground or whatever. You're only paying the sales tax at the register applied to that specific item. So that's it for now. I mean, this video, it looks like it's going on for over 45 minutes. I knew it was going to be a long one because there's a lot of misinformation that's been put out there. Plus, obviously, there's probably going to be people new to this plan that needed to have this explained to them. So, like I said, I'm not some professional YouTuber. I'm just a guy actually sitting in my work truck right now on a break that is, wanting to address this very important issue, and not just to me, but to the good of the country, because we need to get this plan passed. And, I don't want to say that, by whatever means necessary. I'm not saying we should be playing political games just to get this passed. I personally think that the fair tax should be passed on its own merits. But like I said, this is the current situation we're in. It's been thrust into the public eye, for better or worse. And it gives, me and the other fair tax volunteers and supporters a chance to start really pushing for this and addressing a lot of these criticisms and helping educate, the public at large. So, like I said at the beginning, if you've got any questions, criticisms, whatever, feel free to let me know. I will try to address them as best I can, and I hope you all have a great day.